ago, the U.S. government announced it would increase existing tariffs on Chinese EVs from 25% to 100%. Right now, Canada imposes a 6% tariff on those types of cars when they come into our country. However, the government also offers a $5,000 rebate on every purchase of an electric vehicle. So should Canada hike the tariff to protect Canadian jobs? Let's ask the front bench. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair, CTV News political analyst and former Toronto Mayor John Tory, and Globe and Mail parliamentary reporter Christy Kirkup. Welcome to you all. Tom, start with you on this one. It's not a simple ask of the federal government, but when you consider the relationship that Canada has with China right now, is it more difficult than some may think?
I agree with the first part of your question. It's not as easily said as by Trudeau. Oh yeah, we'll just slap 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, as it is by Doug Ford, who's playing to his political base, saying all you got to do is slap 100% tariff. And Trudeau is quite right. It is much more complicated than that. You have to show harm. You have to show that they've been dumping. You have to show government involvement, intentional intervention by the Chinese government to lower those prices, to swamp the market, to kill the Canadian jobs that we've been trying to invest in. So yes, it's a tougher road to hoe, but it doesn't mean that Trudeau shouldn't be acting, because I think that the evidence is there. And the Americans play by the rules generally in international trade deals, and for them to have been boosting this and to going after the Chinese vehicles, they've got enough evidence. We should dovetail on that, put ourselves in lockstep with the Americans. We are in lockstep with them in the car market in North America since the 60s with the Auto Pact, and we've got to continue. We're investing heavily to have our part of that market, and I don't think that it's that difficult to prove that the Chinese are not playing fair, but it's not as simple as Doug Ford would have it, simply declaring 100% tariff.
Yeah, and John, especially as Tom said, our auto sector is so interconnected. Are you at all shocked that Canada hasn't moved sooner, because we know that the U.S. has done this already?
No, I'm not, because you do have to do your homework, as Tom said. But as Tom also said, I mean, these industries, the auto industry in the two countries, are so totally integrated and intertwined that we're really left with not much choice. But the Prime Minister has to be careful. Sometimes they have acted very quickly on saying, yes, we're going to do something like that, and live to regret that later. But look, even the tariff, though, we shouldn't pretend, is going to render our offering in the electric vehicle marketplace, as competitive as it needs to be. The 100% tariff will still bring our price, bring the price of their vehicle up, but will not close the gap entirely. So Chinese vehicles, to the extent they're imported here, will still be cheaper. And people are suffering from an affordability crisis, but still want to do the right thing for the environment. So we've got a problem, and we have another challenge of one or two things we have to do as well, which is improve our charging infrastructure. They have way better charging infrastructure in China, and that's going to lead them to have more success at home with their electric vehicles. And secondly, we have to fix our performance with regard to mining. We have the critical minerals needed for batteries and other things in electric vehicles, but we've moved very slowly, and the Chinese have the advantage of an integrated process with the minerals they also have, and we've got to get going on that too.
Yeah, Christy, talk a little bit about that, because John mentioning that, look, yeah, we can do this, but Canada's EV, electric vehicle industry, isn't quite where China's is right now. And I had put that to Vic Fideli, saying, look, your government was the one that took away the rebate in Ontario, so wouldn't you want to try and make it more competitive against the Chinese, the price of a Chinese EV, by also offering that? He didn't seem open to that.
Yeah, I think certainly at the end of the day, Canada is really trying to beef up its presence in terms of electric vehicles, and the politics of the Ontario Premier coming out today is really about the fact that, he's worried about jobs specifically in Ontario and how that's going to impact manufacturers here in Canada. So there, I think the political pressure as well, because of the fact that the U.S. has taken the position that it has, it applies greater pressure on Canada. But at the end of the day, we are bringing in a lot of vehicles from outside of Canada, electric vehicles. We are trying to build up our bandwidth, but we're just not there yet in terms of that manufacturing, bandwidth, and Canada's trying to improve in that regard.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Tom, because I put it to Vic Fideli. I said, your government has really gone all in on this, but at the same time, there are some stats out there showing that General Motors and other manufacturers are actually slowing down the manufacturing of electric vehicles. Is that not something that both levels of government need to be concerned about?
Absolutely. Quebec is part of the attempt by Canada to get into the battery market. And we've got a couple of big plants in Quebec. You've got some huge ones in Ontario that are coming in. But one of them, by Ford, in an area that's basically on the south shore of the St. Lawrence, halfway between Quebec City and Montreal, they've simply pulled out. They'd started building it and they've pulled out. So yeah, there is that. No question. That was Ford. You're talking about GM. But some of these large American companies are saying gasoline engines are going to be around for a lot longer than the governments seem to believe. We saw Rishi Sunak pull back from the mandate that had been put in place in Great Britain to have all electric vehicles much faster. He slowed that down. Is this an attempt by the auto industry to keep the same old, same old? Are we really going to be able to go through this transition and reduce our greenhouse gases as we see every day the proof of global warming and climate change around us? Are we going to somehow abandon that fight because the market is dictating to these companies what choices they should be making? They think maybe they can get governments, as the UK government did, to back down. These are the big questions. And it's worth pointing out, yes, that Ontario, when they removed that government subsidy that was there, that was essentially just giving back the sales tax, not much more than that, but it really helped get people to buy. I benefited from that because in Quebec, all of a sudden, the Teslas that were flowing back in from Ontario, they were putting, without even advertising them, they were putting in showroom rebates, which was never something that existed before for Teslas, simply because there were that many cars coming back in from Ontario. So I think that Ontario has a lot to offer. It has a lot of ability to get its clean electricity to the extent that it's not produced by fossil fuels. And I think that they should be moving along. If they're going to have this massive investment in electric vehicles, the least they can do is encourage people to be able to buy them.
John, is there a concern that Canada and Ontario won't, and Quebec to an extent for what they've invested as well, that they won't get their return on investment?
Sure. I mean, and you know, when you do these things, it's a bet. There are people, as you know, who argue because it's a bet that you shouldn't make those bets, at least government shouldn't. But back on the subject of the marketplace and people buying these cars, these people that run auto companies, you can be critical of them for this or that, but they're pretty smart about what they do, and they're in business to make money. So that when they slow down the process, I don't think it's them clinging to the combustion engine. I think it's them knowing what my friends say when I talk to them and my colleagues, which is a lot of people are not ready to step up and buy these yet because they're concerned about charging infrastructure, they're concerned about winter and the batteries, they're concerned about how long distance that you can travel in this very broad country of ours. So I just think we have to keep working at those things, keep working at getting our price down. You know, the Europeans are doing that. The Europeans are, you know, working at this by getting their own prices down to be closer to the Chinese prices. And so we have to do that too. I mean, I think the tariff will be necessary at the beginning, but you know, I just think that maybe the actual slower pace of adoption of these vehicles is a benefit for us because, as Tom says, we don't have any plants up and running yet. They've all been announced and the money's been flowing from the governments, but there aren't any plants in businesses yet, or very few. So we've got to get to work on that too.
Yeah, and Christy, in the meantime, there is a government-imposed deadline for everybody with a new, you know, that wants to buy a new vehicle, that it has to be zero emission.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think that puts a lot of pressure on Canadians. I think, frankly, at the end of the day, to Tom's point, I think people are looking at the evidence of how our climate is evolving, and they are concerned about that, and there's polling to indicate as much. But at the same time, it's about also being able to get access to those vehicles, making those vehicles affordable, and again, for Canada to have the necessary infrastructure in order for Canadians to be able to use these vehicles, again, in a Canadian winter, for example. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think more people do want to get into the realm of EVs, but there are a lot of barriers, frankly, I think, for the average Canadian to perhaps go out and to buy an electric vehicle. I don't own an electric vehicle, full disclosure.
Yeah.
You know, it's not necessarily the most accessible thing right now.
A lot of barriers, and maybe some barriers to some of those Chinese vehicles coming into Canada if the federal government does take Ford's advice and go ahead and slap some tariffs on them. Okay, we're going to